Hello, everyone. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum here at the Kennedy School of Government. My name is David Elwood. I'm the Dean of the Kennedy School. And in a moment, I will be introducing our very special guest tonight, the Israeli ambassador to the UN. But in light of events of last week, where there were some disruptions when the FBI director was speaking, I just want to say a couple of words to clarify where we stand on things. As you all know, this is, I think, the Kennedy School and this forum is one of the great gems of this school, this university, in the country. And I know everyone here realizes how lucky we are because of the kinds of speakers we have and the exceptional kind of talent we have. And what's also remarkable about this place is at a time when society seems to be getting less and less civil, this is a place that always has two characteristics. We have a speaker who speaks thoughtfully and often provocatively. And then, and this is an absolute requirement for speaking at the Kennedy School, we have open and unfettered questions from the audience. And that's the kind of dialogue that means there's a real chance to learn and to listen and to grow. And for that, I think we should be enormously grateful. Now, on rare occasions, people do choose to create a disturbance. And I do understand the sort of passion and idealism that often drives it. But of course, if this happens a lot, it will drive out the very dialogue from both sides, from all sides, that we all crave. And so, again, what is always the case here, or almost always the case, is that people listen respectfully and then ask questions respectfully, often very hard and challenging questions, but respectfully nonetheless. So I just want to make clear that if people are disruptive, that we will have to escort you out, and that's the policy. But I'm counting on all of you to continue what has always been the case when I've had the opportunity to be here, that we listen and learn and really treasure this rare moment where we get to hear so many different extraordinary people. So with that, let me turn it now to the chance to introduce our speaker. I'd like to begin, though, by offering a warm welcome to Nadav Tamir, who is the Consul General of New England and a Kennedy School alumnus, and one of the many that we are very, very proud of. He's doing an exceptional job. I'm also very pleased to welcome the members of the Kennedy School of Government's Women's Leadership Board. They're having their biannual meeting here, and they, too, wanted to participate in these events. And so this is a group that supports activities throughout the school, particularly the Women in Public Policy program here at the Kennedy School, providing research and student internships. And the board has asked me to announce that in honor of the ambassador's visit, they will sponsor a 2008 summer internship for a student to go to Israel and work with a woman leader in government or an organization serving to advance women. So our thanks to them. Now let me finally turn to our speaker, Ambassador Dan Gillerman, who is the permanent representative of Israel in the United Nations. But what's interesting about the ambassador, and you will find he is quite an effective and thoughtful speaker, but what's remarkable about him is he's traveled a career that I think all of us might aspire to in terms of its movement between business and government and many other activities. Indeed, it really does illustrate the multi-sectoral nature of the world that I think is increasingly part of solving problems. He's an experienced businessman. He was the CEO of several critical Israeli companies in the chemical, food ingredient, agriculture, and technological sectors. He served as chairman of the Federation of Israeli Chambers of Commerce, a member of the First International Bank of Israel, and a director of the Central Bank of Israel, among many other activities. Then, on January 1, 2003, he became the first Israeli ambassador to the UN to be appointed from the private sector. And his tenure at the UN has indeed been impressive. In June of 2005, he was elected Vice President of the General Assembly of the UN. The last time that happened was 55 years ago, when Abba Eban did that very same thing. In November 2005, he became the first Israeli representative to successfully introduce a resolution to the UN General Assembly. And that resolution, adopted unanimously, designated January 27th as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. He has served as the voice of Israel in many gatherings, but he's also served as a voice of people around the world, and including in activities at the World Economic Forum, where for many years he was deeply involved and engaged. He has served on the Prime Minister's National Economic Council and Social Council, the President's Committee of the Coordinating Council of Israel's Economic Organizations. Well, you get the picture. This is a man who understands the economics, understands the politics, and understands people. And it is my very, very great honor to introduce to you Ambassador Dan Gillerman.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very gracious introduction. It's going to be amended, though. Next time anybody reads my introduction, it will say, spoke at the Kennedy School of Government. I must tell you, I've spoken at hundreds of venues all around the world, tried to bring the voice of Israel to many places around the world. This tops them all. I mean, this is just incredible. I had the opportunity to walk with Dean Elwood from the faculty club to here, and this great weather you arranged for me. The weather was actually arranged by Nadav Tamir, our Consul General, who is really the very best we have, and another example to the wonderful produce of the Kennedy School. And I looked around and I just, I couldn't stop myself from pinching myself and saying, this is real. I mean, I'm not only at Harvard, I'm going to speak at Harvard, and I'm going to speak at the Kennedy School. And when I look around and then see this incredible venue, I'm really very, very, very excited. I feel that I need to make an apology before I start for my hoarseness. It may be the excitement of speaking here. It may also be the fact that Nadav and his team have worked me like crazy, but they kept telling me, wait, you have to keep your voice for 6 p.m. on Wednesday. That's when the most important event is taking place. But I'm sorry I'm a bit hoarse. It's actually not the first time that I find myself in need of apologizing for some kind of impediment while I'm at the podium. It wasn't long ago that I was shaving in the morning and thinking about a speech I was going to deliver that night. And while I shaved, I cut myself very badly. When I was standing at the podium that evening at a very big event, that cut was still very prominent. And I felt I had to explain it. No makeup would hide it. And I told the audience that morning while I was shaving, I was thinking about my speech, and I cut my face. At the end of my speech, a very nice gentleman came up to me, an elderly gentleman, and said, Mr. Ambassador Gillerman, I have a piece of advice for you. Next time you shave, think about your face and cut your speech. It's a true story. It's a true story. So as Henry VIII said to each of his 6 wives, I won't keep you for very long. But I am very grateful for this very unique opportunity to share with you some thoughts about a country I love very much and I'm very proud of, and about where we are at this very crucial, very confusing moment in time. And I will start with a warning, and that warning is that everything you hear from me tonight will have to be taken in the context of me being an incurable optimist. I am an optimist. I believe the only way you can survive in the very tough neighborhood we live in is to be an optimist, hopefully also a romantic, and have a sense of humor. These are 3 prerequisites to surviving in Israel and in the region we live in. And one would ask, how could someone be optimistic at this very, very difficult time? This is not an easy time. It's not an easy time to be an Israeli. It's certainly not an easy time to be a citizen of the world. We look around us and we see tremendous violence and problems and terrorism. And where does one take that optimism from? Israel in particular finds itself in the throes of great remorse and recrimination and soul-searching and investigations and inquiries at the moment, following the war in Lebanon last year, which was a very, very tough confrontation between us and the Hezbollah, where we faced a very brutal, bloodthirsty, cynical, and evil enemy. And we're still licking our wounds. We're still not healed. But in a very strange way, I believe that it is that confrontation last summer, coupled with what we see around us in the world today, that gives us that ray of hope, which we are so eager for. Because I believe that much of the world, certainly the United States, much of Europe, but more importantly, much of the moderate Arab and Muslim world, watched that confrontation and came to two conclusions. One, that it was only the preview. Soon, as you say here, to be seen in a theater near you, if we're not very careful. And two, that we must act quickly to prevent the spread of this and another confrontation of this kind. Because this was not just a confrontation between Israel and a terror organization. This was not just us against the Hezbollah. This was truly the first confrontation between a secular democracy and an extreme fundamentalist Islamic autocratic regime. This was really between us and Iran. Hezbollah are nothing more than a unit in the Iranian army and the hired killers and proxies of that regime, extreme, dangerous regime in Tehran. And the world realized that what we were doing was something that was important, not just for us, but for the rest of the world. I cannot begin to tell you how many ambassadors, Arab ambassadors, representing countries that have no diplomatic relations with us, that are hostile to us, came to me at the United Nations, some of them publicly in the Security Council, others more discreetly in the halls and corridors of the United Nations, put their arms around me and said, "Go, girl, don't stop, finish the job." They knew that what we were doing was right. When I was sitting at the Security Council on that second day of the war and turned to my Lebanese colleague and looked him straight in the eye and said, "You know, deep down inside, that if you could, you would be sitting right here next to me, saying the same things I'm saying, because you know that if we are successful, at the end of the day, Lebanon will be the winner." I looked at him, he bowed his head. He did not acknowledge me, but I knew that I was right. And that there was a moment there when you could feel that the world was watching and hoping that maybe this would indeed be a line in the sand. Well, it was a line in the sand. It did not finish the way, it did not end the way we hoped it would. There was no resounding, decisive Israeli victory like there was in many other wars. But at the same time, there was a very decisive and important and unanimous Security Council resolution that put an end to it and established totally new ground rules in Lebanon. I don't want to go into the technicalities of that because I think it's less important. I think what's most important is that what this served as was a wake-up call to us, to our neighbors, and to the rest of the world. It was truly a call to arms, a wake-up call, truly a preview of something that we want to prevent. And I think what happened was that much of the Arab and Muslim world realized for the first time what the real problem was. And they realized it wasn't Israel. They realized what the real threat was, and they realized it wasn't us. they realized that the real threat was Iran and the spread of Shia extremism, Shia imperialism, and the undermining of moderate Arab forces. They realized that this was indeed a battle between the moderates and the extremists. And I feel that something very profound has happened. You know, I believe a professor in this school or at Harvard, Samuel Huntington, wrote a book about 12 years ago called The Clash of Civilizations. In it, he said that there was a clash between the West and Islam, and that the borders of Islam are marked in blood. I did not agree with him then. I was one of the people who wasn't that excited about that book. It became a very good catchphrase, but I didn't think it was right then. I am convinced it is not right today. Because what we're witnessing today is not a clash of civilizations. What we are witnessing, sadly and tragically today, is a clash of civilization in the singular. Because when you look at it, you realize, tragically, sadly, horrifically, that most of the violence, most of the terror, most of the clashes, most of the bloodshed is within Islam. It's between the moderates and the extremists, whether it's between Hezbollah and the government of Lebanon, or whether it's between Fatah and Hamas, or whether it's between Sunni and Shia, or whether it's between the Persians and the Arabs. And the most amazing thing and heartbreaking thing is that the vast majority of the victims are Muslims. Every day, hundreds of Muslims are killed by Muslims, whether it's in Iraq or in Afghanistan or in Mombasa or in Sharm el-Sheikh or in Algeria or in Morocco or in Amman. And to me, the most frightening thing is the eerie silence, the sound of silence. On the one hand, you saw the reaction, the violent reaction to a few cartoons in a Danish newspaper. Millions went out in the street. People were killed. There was real violence in the street. And then when thousands and thousands are killed, you would expect at least one Muslim leader to stand up and say, enough. What are we doing to each other? Let's stop this. You know, these are very harsh words, I know. But it seems to me that we live in a world where if Christians kill Muslims, it's a crusade. If Jews kill Muslims, it's a massacre. When Muslims kill Muslims, it's the Weather Channel. Nobody cares. But I think they're starting to care. I think the realization is hitting home that something bad, something ominous, something dangerous is happening to that incredible society, to that incredible religion. The one that brought us until the 6th century, one of the greatest inventions and greatest advancement, and was the most enlightened and the most liberal, and should be one again. And therefore, I believe that what we're seeing today, in wake of this realization, is an awakening of the moderate Arab and Muslim states, and their realization that they need to do something, and they need to do it quick. I believe that what we saw in Riyadh a few weeks ago, that Arab summit, was not about Israel. It was about them. It was about Iran. It is about how do we solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which we want to solve more badly than anybody else. Believe me, there isn't another country in the world that yearns for peace, that needs peace, that has fought so much and lost so much. You know, we've lost 23,000 young men in this less than 60 years of our existence. I mean, just imagine, how much better we could be, how many more Nobel Prizes and symphonies could be written, and inventions could be invented, and how much better life could be if these people were alive today. And there's those thousands who were lost on the other side. And we need to make peace, and we can make peace. And I believe that what we've seen in Riyadh, was a getting together of like-minded countries, including what is now known as the Arab Quartet, who are saying, we realize where the real danger lies, but let's solve this problem. We'll quiet our streets, and then we can align ourselves against the real danger. I believe that what will be happening this weekend in Sharm el-Sheikh will be another stage in this direction. And I believe that this realization, because of the crisis we find ourselves in, is of tremendous importance and presents us, in spite of all the hardship and all the violence and all the problems and all the question marks, with a unique opportunity. And we must seize this moment. I believe the solution lies in three things, which I would call LLB, and don't confuse it with a law degree. I think there are three things we need today. We need legitimacy, we need leadership, and we need business. And I'll try and explain what I mean. By legitimacy, I mean legitimacy given by the Arab world, by the Muslim world, and by the rest of the world, to a brave and courageous Palestinian leader who will say, enough is enough. We've kept our people hostages to their dreams and hostages to poverty for too long. It's time to make peace. I believe most Palestinians want peace. I don't believe a single baby is born wanting to be a suicide bomber. I don't believe a single mother gives birth to a child dreaming that one day she'll rejoice at him blowing himself up. But a Palestinian leader needs the legitimacy of the Arab world and of the Muslim world. It was never given before, not even during Camp David in 2000 did President Clinton manage to mobilize the whole Arab world. King Hussein of Jordan showed tremendous bravery, but it wasn't enough. I believe that if today, those 22 Arab countries, and I can tell you I speak to Arab leaders and prime ministers and foreign ministers and to Muslim leaders ranging from Oman and Qatar to Indonesia and Pakistan, and they all feel that this is the moment to come and say, go for it. We will back you. Whatever agreement you reach, you will have the seal of approval of the Arab world and the Muslim world. That's legitimacy. The other thing we need is business. We need money. We need to inject huge amounts of money, both for infrastructure and projects, and increasing and improving the quality of life of the Palestinians and making their state a viable and vibrant one. These are very clever and very entrepreneurial people. They can turn Gaza into the Hong Kong of the Middle East if their leaders choose to do that rather than turn it into a terror base and a launching pad for missiles. We must also infuse great amounts of money in order to finally solve the refugee problem. The war in Iraq is costing, I think, $2 billion a day. We're talking about settling 4 million people. How much do you think it would cost? So I think business, entrepreneurship, projects, visionary projects, and small businesses can really help to create the framework for this. And then at the end, we need leadership. You know, without in any way equating the situation in Israel to the situation in South Africa, because they're totally different, I believe that South Africa would never be where it is today if history had not provided that war-torn, bloody, bleeding country with those two great men at that moment in time, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk. Now, I believe Israel, over the last decade, has provided the world with at least 4 de Klerks. Yitzhak Rabin, who paid for it with his life, Shimon Peres, who is still striving for it, Ehud Barak, who made the most far-reaching and generous offer any Israeli ever did, and Arik Sharon, who pulled out of Gaza and was willing to make a deal. Tragically, not just for us or for the region, but especially for the Palestinians themselves, they were unable to provide a Mandela, and proved yet again, sadly, what my illustrious and greatest predecessor said. And Abba Ibn said that Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Today, there is this opportunity again, precisely because of the state we are in. And I believe that if those three things come together, the money is there, the legitimacy is given, and the leader is there. It could be Mahmoud Abbas, who really believes in the right things. He just needs the courage and the support and the conviction and determination and commitment to do it. They will find in Israel a partner who would be willing to go a very long way with them to make peace and to finally bring solace and peace to the very troubled and tough neighborhood we live in. I believe it's possible. I believe that because of where we are at this moment in time, it can happen far quicker than anybody imagines. Great opportunities arise out of great crisis. And sometimes you need the crisis to be deeper and greater and tougher for the opportunity to be taken. And I believe we can do it, and I hope very much that we will. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So as promised, we do have time for questions. There are 4 microphones located around the hall. I notice everyone seems to have lined up on the right-hand side. I don't know what that means, but there's one right here, there's one right there, there's one here, and there's one over here. Now let me remind you, many of you know this by heart at this stage. There are several characteristics of a good question. First of all, it has only one question. Second of all, it is short. Third of all, you start by identifying yourself. And fourth, it ends with a question mark. And so with that, let me turn here for our first question, and Janice Shorenstein, who was the former head of the Women's Leadership Board.
Ambassador Gillerman, what you describe in the region of the Middle East between Israel and the Arab community is somewhat reflected in microcosm on the campuses of the United States as well as around the world, both verbally and physically. And I wondered from your perspective as the wonderful negotiator that you are, that you could give us some sense of the kind of constructive dialogue that could be forged on campuses, the way in which that might be initiated and carried through.
Thank you. I think what we're doing today is an excellent example. I think you should always start with a dialogue. I think it's very healthy to have a debate. I don't think people should agree on everything. I think part of the fabric and excitement of life is having divergent opinions and different opinions. But I think people should get to know each other. I think this is really what it's all about. You know that I was in LA a few months ago, and I had lunch with Steven Spielberg, who told me about an incredibly exciting project he's planning. And what he's trying to do is he's already bought 200 cameras, 200 video cameras. And he's going to Israel, and he's going to give 100 cameras to Palestinians and 100 cameras to Israeli children or youths. And he's going to get them to photograph their life, everyday life. Just kitchen sink dramas, as the British used to call them. Nothing political. Then they're going to exchange cameras. And each one is going to see the other's films and then sort of film each other. I think, in a way, you spoke about microcosm. This is a microcosm of what we should do. We should get to know each other. We should not stereotype each other. We should not characterize each other in black and white. None of us are black and white. We're all pretty gray. And I believe the same is true for campuses. I think there should be a very healthy dialogue. I think another thing which we should do, when I say we Israelis, is try to bring to the awareness of others the country we really are. This is what I constantly strive to do at the United Nations. My first request, maybe even command, although in Israel you cannot command anybody because, you know, they don't listen anyway, so why would you command them? If you ask nicely, sometimes they do. was let's stop being a one-issue mission. Let's bring to the awareness of our colleagues and the rest of the world what an incredible country Israel really is. Its beauty and its innovation and its creativity and its art and its culture and its beaches and its pubs and its young people who are determined to live their life and drink beer and dance and just make life better every day. I think, this is very important, and the young people, and I know there are a few Israelis in the audience, I think, you should, they should just know we're normal. Thank you.
Right up here.
Hi, I'm Robbie Maisner. I'm a third-year student at the medical school. I'm wondering, what is the official Israeli position on the events in Darfur? What is the Israeli government doing in order to relieve that situation, and what more you think they could do?
Well, Israel, I think, like most of the world, regards what is happening in Darfur as a genocide and a catastrophe of historic proportions. Israel is trying to help, both via the United Nations and directly. But it is very difficult. It's very difficult, just as it is difficult for the United Nations to go in there. I mean, I know the Secretary General, the new Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon of Korea, who is very concerned about what is happening in Darfur, is very frustrated by the behavior of the Sudanese government. But so far, no decision has been taken to go in there in spite of their objection. I think the time is very near. And I can assure you that once it's accessible, once you can go there, you will find Israelis among the first there. We always are. When there are disasters around the world, whether it's the tsunami, where countries sent billions, we could not compete with that. But the day after, you had Israelis there, forensic teams, trauma experts, doctors, psychiatrists, social workers, working with the people. This is what we do. You'll find Israelis on the highest peaks of the Andes, and you will find them in the most remote deserts of Africa, working with the people. We have brought some refugees from Darfur to Israel, as many as we could, and they're now living in Israel. We have encouraged demonstrations about what is happening in Darfur, both in Israel and here. The Jewish organizations were very, very powerful and organized a 1 million person demonstration in Washington. We're doing as much as we can, but I think much more needs to be done.
Right up here.
Yes, hi, my name is Jared Zaffer, and I'm a sophomore at the college. Thank you for coming, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
My question is one that just has to be asked, and whether or not you choose to answer it is obviously your choice. But today, Tzipi Livni, the Deputy Prime Minister, called for the resignation of Ehud Olmert, who, at single digits in approval ratings, might not be the best partner for peace with the Palestinians. Do you call as well for his resignation?
Which school do you go to?
I go to the college.
Which one?
Harvard College. I'm an undergraduate.
Harvard College. Okay. You're not at the Kennedy School?
No.
Okay. So you're not a diplomat?
In no way am I a diplomat. No.
Well, well, I am. I could have stopped here, but I'll make the big mistake of answering your question. I think what we're seeing over the last few days in Israel is just another manifestation of the power and immense effectiveness of Israel's democracy. Israel is truly a democracy. It is a country of transparency and accountability. The soul-searching taking place in Israel after the war would not have taken place in many countries I know. I don't want to talk about this country, but I cannot think of many countries who, after a war, which had very important achievements, maybe not the resounding and decisive victory we used to, would go into this process of appointing a totally independent committee of inquiry, give it all the freedom it can, and let it publish its conclusions, knowing they're going to be devastating. The political debate that is going on is part of a political debate which I think any democracy should be proud of. And I think that this may be one of Israel's toughest moments, but it is also Israel's finest hour. And it is not for anyone to decide the fate of anyone in Israel. It is for the Israeli people to do so. It is for people's conscience to direct them. And I believe that at the end of the day, whoever has to take a decision will take the right decision. What I can promise you is that in spite of all these problems and in spite of all these hardships, Israel will prevail as a democracy.
Shaloha, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Ari Cole, and I'm a Kennedy student from Hawaii, the beautiful island of Maui, and also Massachusetts. I'd like to say thank you so much from the bottom of our heart at the Kennedy School for you coming to teach us and share with us your wisdom. It's beautiful to listen to.
Thank you very much.
Also, I'd like to thank Ambassador Ayalon, who invited me to come to Israel roughly a year ago off the camera. And I'd like to say that going to Jerusalem was a calling, a spiritual calling to celebrate the Jewish faith, Christ, a Jewish family, and also about the Torah. It's changed my life. My question to you, Mr. Ambassador, because Dean Elwood looks like I have to get to my question. Yeah. I'm kind of long-winded. My question to you is, going to Jerusalem was a calling for me as a person of faith. It changed my life. How can you bring more young people from America to go worship at the wall, to talk to the person that's there? The spirit that's in Jerusalem is very special. And also to understand the culture of Christianity and Judaism and the Muslim faith that's there. You have such a crown jewel in Jerusalem. How can you bring us there in peace to enjoy your culture?
Well, thank you. Thank you for your very kind words about what I believe to be the most beautiful and exciting city in the world. And I'm, of course, very objective, as you can tell. I believe that what you're saying is right. I wish more people came, not just to Jerusalem, but to Israel. Israel is a country you cannot understand unless you feel it, touch it, smell it, experience it, and see it for yourself. If you rely only on the cable newswork and on what you see on television, you will think of Israel as a war-torn country of destruction and bloodshed. It is not until you get there that you realize how much excellence, how much art, how much culture, how much beauty, how normal it is. You know, it's Wednesday night. It's now 1:45 in the morning in Israel. If you were driving along the beach, along Hayakon Street in Tel Aviv right now, you would be in one hell of a traffic jam. The pubs and the bars will be filled with people having beer and singing and dancing. The nightclubs would be full. People will be coming out of concerts by the Israel Philharmonic and great performances by Israeli theater and dance groups. You know, when I'm in New York, I must tell you, I feel that my real sense of pride and the real ambassadors of Israel are not me and not even my great team at the UN, but the artists that Israel exports to that city. There isn't a day goes by that you don't have an Israeli soloist playing with the New York Philharmonic, an Israeli conductor conducting it, an Israeli soprano singing with the Metropolitan Opera, an Israeli dance group dancing at the Joyce, Israeli photographers and artists opening exhibitions at the MoMA, at the Guggenheim, and in Chelsea. It's just unbelievable. So I just think more people should come to Israel. I'm plugging it wherever I can. I even I took a very big risk and I appeared on the Jon Stewart show the other day for the simple reason that I was told that most young Americans like you get your news more from the Jon Stewart show than you do from CNN or Fox or anybody else. So I'm doing all I can, but you continue doing what you are. I mean, you're a great ambassador for us. Thank you very much.
Right over here.
Ambassador Gillerman, thank you for being here. My name is Sara Yafi. I'm a Lebanese student at the Kennedy School of Government first year. And also, as part of my introduction, I want to tell you I am not a Hezbollah proponent, not a Hamas proponent. I'm not even a proponent of my own government, and not a proponent of your own government either. And
Nobody's perfect. Yeah.
And so I come to you as the human being that I am, having lived, you know, all these years in Lebanon, and I'm just going to refer to the July War of last year and the horror that I saw in my own country. And I know that you referred to Hezbollah as the bloodthirsty, cynical, evil people, which to me, I see the IDF like this, seeing what they've done to my own country. So from the human being that you are, even taking it as further as from the grandfather that you are, from the father that you are, to the student that I am, to the citizen that I am, do you feel that you owe me an apology?
I feel, first of all, that I owe you a salute for your bravery and for your frankness. I think that if anybody owes you an apology, it truly is those people who took your beautiful, entrepreneurial, freedom-loving, fun-loving, pluralistic, democratic country hostage and turned it into a war-torn war zone. You know, I mean, I don't know whether you can agree with me in public. I'll be happy to have a private discussion with you. But, you know, Lebanon, until 38 years ago, until actually 1975, was one of the most beautiful countries in the world. That was probably before you were born.
Still is.
Pardon?
It still is.
It still is.
Beirut to me is the most magnificent
No, I agree.
city.
I agree. It still is. I was there, and it was. I was in LA and I was in Bahamdoun, and I've seen some of the most beautiful parts of your country, admittedly under less than perfect conditions. But it was a fun-loving country. People described it as the Switzerland of the Middle East. The Lebanese people are entrepreneurial, they are fun-loving, they are freedom-loving, they are pluralistic. And then they were taken hostage, first by the Syrians, who to this day regard Lebanon as southern Lebanon. There isn't a single marking on the border. There is no border between Syria and Lebanon. There is no Lebanese embassy in Damascus. There is no Syrian embassy in Beirut. They simply regard you as part of them, as part of Lebanon. They strangled you, part of Syria. They have taken you over. They have terrorized you. They have strangled you. They have assassinated cold-bloodedly your leaders, including Rafik Hariri, who wanted to rebuild Beirut and rebuild Lebanon. And then they introduced, together with Iran, that bloodthirsty, cynical, evil group of terrorists called the Hezbollah, which has taken the whole south of your country hostage, turned it into Hezbollah land. Not a single person from north of the Litani would dare tread in southern Lebanon. You can tell me when was the last time you or your family were in southern Lebanon. It became an enclave of the Hezbollah. It was a place where the Hezbollah did whatever they wanted and strangled the country and terrorized both Israel and Lebanon. What Israel did in response to the brutal kidnapping of two of our boys, Udi Goldwasser and Eldad Regev, and the horrible shelling by long-range, middle-range, and short-range missiles of our cities was what any democratic country would do to defend itself. I know that there were innocent people killed. We are sorry and we hurt for every Lebanese child or woman or innocent that was killed. But you have to understand, you were hostages to that. You know how many Lebanese came up to me and said to me, look, I hope I hope you rid us of that cancerous growth which has grown in our midst. You know that some of the people who were killed in their own homes because their homes were taken over by the Hezbollah and they were made to host missiles in their homes. Hundreds of homes had missiles in their homes. Now, when you go to sleep with a missile, you can't be surprised if you don't wake up in the morning. And that is what Lebanon became. And what Israel did is what any democracy in the world would do. What do you think the United States would do if Chicago, its second largest city, as Haifa is ours, was shelled across the Canadian border? You think they would send flowers to the terrorists? They would fight. They would try and stop it. And I believe that there is today, because of Resolution 1701, because of the presence of 15,000 Lebanese soldiers in the south, because of the presence of an additional 15,000 international soldiers under UN mandate in the south, for the first time, a chance to rid Lebanon both of the Syrian strangulation and the cancerous growth of Hezbollah and make it free and vibrant and entrepreneurial again. Make Lebanon free and make Israel safe.
Right up here.
Hi, my name is John Gould. I'm a freshman at the college. First off, thank you so much for coming. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
You mentioned Iran a few times over the course of your talk, but not in the context of nuclear proliferation and possibility of nuclear terrorism down the road. So I just want to ask, based on your experience at the United Nations, where there's been some action, but in many people's minds not enough, and your experience in America, where there's currently a sanctions bill before Congress, what can be done by Israel, by America, by the UN, by anybody to stop Iran?
Well, let's first make it very clear. Iran is the most imminent danger to world stability today. This is a mad, lunatic, ranting regime headed by a president who is denying the Holocaust while preparing the next one, and who publicly speaks about his quest for nuclear weapons so that he can wipe Israel off the face of the map. Iran is very dangerous, not just to Israel, but to the rest of the world. It is a true threat to world stability. Now, the good news is that within Iran, there are a lot of forces who object to the rule of the Ayatollahs and to that autocratic rule and to that mad quest. Iran is a very young country. I believe over 50% of all Iranians are under the age of 18. 40% of all Iranians are university students. Iran has had 3 grassroots revolutions in the past. It is a freedom-loving country, and I think that most Iranians today are very unhappy with where this Ahmadinejad, the president, is leading them. At the same time, there is a growing awareness in the international community that this has to be dealt with because it is a very real danger. I can tell you that the Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, told me, you know, I spoke to him a lot about Iran because he comes from South Korea and he's lived next to a nuclear neighbor for a long time. He knows what nuclear threats is all about. And he said a very perceptive sentence to me. He said, you know, the difference between North Korea and Iran is that North Korea attained nuclear weapons out of desperation. Iran is seeking them out of aspiration. That's a huge difference. Now, I believe that the pressure on Iran is working. People seem to be a bit skeptical about whether sanctions will work, about whether UN resolutions have any effect. I can tell you that the Iranians are very, very worried by those UN resolutions. Not so much by their wording, not so much by one sanction or another, but mainly by their unanimity. They were very rattled when in December the Security Council reached consensus and 15 countries unanimously voted to impose sanctions on Iran, isolating it, making it a pariah state. Now, those 15 countries included the United States, Britain, and France on the one hand, but also Russia and China on the other hand, and Qatar, a Muslim Arab country, Iran's immediate neighbor. The Iranians were very rattled and very worried by that. Then, just last month, Another resolution came, this time with Indonesia, who is a new member of the Security Council, the world's largest Muslim country, supporting sanctions that name and shame Iranians and Iranian organizations, ban them from traveling and freeze their assets. No country wants to be a pariah. No country wants to be a leper. And I think even within Iran, I know we're hearing voices of people, including the leadership, who are very unhappy with where Ahmadinejad is leading them. So I very much hope that diplomacy, economic pressure, divestment will eventually work. Because, as I said, you have the elements within Iran to make it work. If it doesn't, all other options are on the table. What I can promise you is that I believe that many countries in this world, including Israel and the United States, will not agree to a situation where this crazy regime is in possession of nuclear weapons or even has the capability or the capacity to produce them.
Right up here.
Hello, Ambassador Gillerman. My name is Saad Atshan. I'm a Palestinian student here at the Kennedy School. And while growing up in the West Bank city of Ramallah, I never really understood why Israel builds these illegal Jewish settlements in the West Bank. I remember being, as a child, sitting in the car and asking my parents why we couldn't drive on the Jewish-only roads that connect the settlements. And my parents always told me, we are not Jewish. We have a green license plate on our car, not a yellow one. Now, given that these settlements are illegal under international law, given that the International Court of Justice has ruled that the wall that Israel's building is illegal under international law, and since you are the ambassador to the United Nations, why does Israel continually violate international law? Thank you.
I can imagine that being a Palestinian in the occupied territories presents a lot of hardship, and I truly sympathize with that. I've spent 12 years of my life working on regional cooperation, on joint ventures and joint projects between Israelis and Palestinians. I have tremendous respect for the Palestinian people. I think they're entrepreneurial. I think they're among the most intelligent people in our region. I think they could make their country into a paradise. And we try to help in doing that. I think that the tragedy of the Palestinians is their leadership. You're paying a very high price for years of a very corrupt and terror-minded leadership, which has created a situation which has forced Israel to take measures to protect itself. When you talk about the security fence, as we call it, or the wall, as you call it, and calling it the wall is a very effective PR measure which the Palestinians and the Arab world has undertaken, because what they felt was that by calling it a wall, they will bring back memories of the Berlin Wall. Now, let me tell you the difference between the separation fence or the security fence and the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall was erected to separate one people from each other and prevent people from fleeing to freedom. The security fence was erected to separate two people who are at war with each other and stop people from blowing up our cafes and restaurants and universities and baby care centers and supermarkets. And I was just in Israel with the Secretary General. We flew over Israel by helicopter because the day before he visited Palestine and he saw the hardship, and he went through about 10 different checkpoints to witness this hardship. And he came back and he had a lot of sympathy and emotion for the Palestinian people and the hardship they were facing. We took him up by helicopter along the security fence. We showed him how narrow the waist of Israel is. We showed him how easy it was to walk from Jenin or Kalkilia to Kfar Saba or to Netanya. We hovered by helicopter with the rotators going over the Park Hotel in Netanya, where only 5 years ago a Palestinian terrorist entered during one of the holiest nights in Jewish religion, when whole families were celebrating the Seder night, and killed 30 people, including whole families and babies and children. And we told them how that fence was preventing that from happening. The fence has prevented hundreds of deaths of innocents because it simply makes it either impossible or very, very difficult to come over and carry out those acts. Now, one thing I want to make very clear to you. This fence is the Arafat fence. I suggested naming it the Arafat fence because if there was no Arafat and there was no terror, there would be no need for that fence. This fence is totally reversible. The minute there is peace, the minute there is no terror, this fence will be taken off just like this. We've taken fences off before, including in Lebanon. But human lives taken by terror are irreversible. And Israel must protect its citizens against this evil phenomena of suicide bombing, which is, I understand, even contrary to the Quran and to the Muslim belief. It is probably the most vicious of any kind of killings. You know, we had a bombing in a restaurant called Maxim in Haifa. A lady terrorist, 27-year-old lawyer, well-educated and with a very high standard of living. Again, you know, there's this fallacy that poverty breeds terror. I believe the Palestinian people more than anybody else know it's not true. It's not poverty that breeds terror. It's terror that breeds poverty. She came in, she looked around. There were baby carriages. There was a mother feeding her baby. She ate, finished her meal, and blew herself up and killed 27 people. We cannot live with this kind of reality. And as long as there is this violence, as long as the textbooks, both in the Palestinian Authority and in some of the Arab world, teach children to hate rather than to love, we will need to do everything in order to protect the lives of our citizens and of our children. But believe me, the minute there is peace, the minute the Palestinians have a leader that really wants peace and is willing to go for it, all the fences will come down, and we will prove to the rest of the world that Palestinians and Jews, Palestinians and Israelis can live together and make that very tough neighborhood we live in one of the greatest places in the world.
Hi, Ambassador Gillerman. My name is Ryan Saney. I'm a sophomore here at the college. First, I want to thank you for coming here. Israel is very lucky to have such an eloquent, bright, and charismatic leader representing itself on the UN stage. My question has to do with your job as an ambassador. I talked to many of my friends and peers here and some people that I've encountered, and I'm not going to lie, there's a pretty significant amount of anti-Israeli sentiment. I am a Jew and I am a supporter of Israel, but I find it difficult to stay optimistic in front of this constant criticism that the state receives on a daily basis. My question to you is, you as the face of the Israeli nation representing Israel on the world stage at the UN, how do you gear yourself up every single day answering questions and criticisms and staying positive with such negativity?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question. First of all, it's people like you who make me feel every morning when I don my flak jacket and helmet and go to that glass building on First Avenue that I'm not alone. So thank you very much. I'm going to do something very wrong, something which does not serve my interests, and something which I ask you to keep in this very intimate surrounding. You know, when I first took this job, I was a business person. I was never a diplomat, never in government, never in the foreign service. I was chairman of the Israeli Chamber of Commerce. I led many economic delegations abroad. I established ties with many countries that had no diplomatic relations with us. Always believed that, and I don't want to, you know, I don't know whether that's the right thing to say at the Kennedy School, but I always believe that politicians build walls and businessmen build bridges. And, but I was also saying all the time that I felt that in a country like Israel, business people should do more for the country than just make money or worry about their shareholders or the bottom line. And then one day, Arik Sharon, who was then prime minister, and Shimon Peres, who was foreign minister, came to me together, which in itself is an unknown phenomena, and said, look, you've been preaching it all these years, now we want you to go and do it. I said, do what? They said, we want you to be an ambassador. I said, ambassador where? They said, the UN. I said, well, you know, I was always looking for a cushy job and, you know, somewhere where people will love me. But let me think about it for 24 hours. And 24 seconds later, I said yes, because I felt it was an offer I couldn't refuse. And then all my friends told me, you're crazy. The UN, they hate us. They're anti-Semitic. You'll be a leper. You'll be an outcast. You'll be isolated. You'll be boycotted. Nobody will talk to you. Now, I've been there for over 4 years. If you come a bit nearer, I'll whisper in your ear and tell you that I'm enjoying every minute of it. Every minute. It's the most exciting chapter of my life. It's an exciting job. It's an exciting arena. It's an exciting time in one of the most exciting cities in the world. And one thing I found is that I've always believed very much in personal diplomacy. I believe in people. I believe that by creating a dialogue with people, creating trust with people, being truthful with them, you can create the kind of partnership even with people who disagree with you. And over the years, I've really been able to forge very, very close, warm, intimate relations with ambassadors. Some of them became foreign ministers who represent countries that are hostile to us. They don't recognize us. And I've also discovered that by daring and by not taking things for granted and by not giving up, you can achieve things even at the UN, which seemed impossible for a country like Israel a few years ago. In 2004, for the first time ever, the UN held a seminar on anti-Semitism, where Kofi Annan gave a very dramatic and historic speech. In January of 2005, for the first time, the UN held a commemorative session, for the first time ever, to mark the 60th anniversary of the liberation of the death camps in Europe. In March of that year, I accompanied Kofi Annan to Israel when he headed a delegation of 42 heads of state to inaugurate the Holocaust Museum of Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. In June of that year, as Dean Elwood said, I was elected Vice President of the General Assembly, the first time that Israel held that post in 55 years. In November of that year, for the first time ever in its history, the United Nations adopted an Israeli-sponsored resolution making January 27, from then forever after, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And on the 27th of January 2006, I was at the General Assembly Hall, and it was filled to overcapacity. There were another 500 people in another room watching it on closed-circuit television, when that hall was filled with Holocaust survivors. I looked at those people as a band, a choir from Boston, the Zamir choir from Boston, was singing songs in Yiddish, prayers in Yiddish, El Maleh Rachamim. And I looked at those people sitting in that hall where only 30 years ago Zionism was equated with racism. And I saw those old people whose numbers are dwindling away as the Holocaust turns from being a personal memory to a collective history. And I just couldn't believe that this was happening. So, and at the same time, we've had not a single condemnation of Israel by the Security Council over the last few years. And we've had many condemnations of terror attacks, of Hezbollah, of Hamas. We've had very, very strong condemnations of the crazy statements made by the president of Iran. So it's not all bad. I mean, it hasn't become yet a friendly place to Israel. But it's a place where Israel feels much more accepted and feels like a normal country, and where it feels that it can get things done. And I can tell you a secret that either out of my optimism or my naivete, we've even submitted Israel's candidacy to be a member of the Security Council. Admittedly, it will not happen until 2018 or 2019 because that's the first available slot. I don't expect to be there, but I'm pretty sure it will happen. Thank you.
I'm afraid this will have to be the last question.
Thank you, Dean Elwood. My name is Tawfiq Rahim, and I'm a first-year student here at the Kennedy School. Foremost, I'm a Canadian, but I'm also a Muslim, hopefully part of the civilization which you described. And I agreed with part of what you said, maybe 78%, maybe 22%. And I agreed with you.
I'll take the 78.
Let's hope, maybe 78.6, 78.7. Okay. And what I agreed foremost with was this call condemning the actions by the many Muslim terrorists, Muslim oppressors in this world, whether it be in Darfur, whether it be in Iraq. And I want to second that call as a Muslim here today, that these deaths that are happening is a plague on, first, the sanctity of my own religion, but on all of us as, co-members of this human race here. And I firmly agree with that, and I salute you for saying that. But what I wanted to ask you about was the dangerous...
Can we stop here?
We could. Then we'd all go home happy.
Okay.
We'll still be happy, but a little less so.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you about the dangerous premise you put forward about unique innocence. Does the fact that the Sunnis and Shias killing each other make Israel any less culpable for the 1,300 civilian deaths in Lebanon? Does it make the occupation any less real? Does it make the imprisonment any less stifling of 10,000 Palestinian political prisoners? Does it make the refugees any less stateless? Does it make the attacks constantly day to day on Palestinians any less frightening? And does it make the settlements any less colonial? So my question to you today is, can it be true that Israel is so uniquely innocent when everybody else is guilty?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your frankness, and thank you for your eloquence. I wish I could remember, but I'll try. I'll try. Because you mentioned, and you'll help me, please. You mentioned 1,300 innocents killed in Lebanon. Civilians
yes.
Killed in Lebanon. You mentioned the 10,000 prisoners. You mentioned the refugees. What else?
Occupation.
Settlements, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there was, okay.
Yes.
There may have been something else. I referred, and I'm taking this very seriously. I really want you to know that. First of all, I don't think there's anyone who is uniquely innocent. I don't think anybody is completely wrong and anybody else is completely right. I think we've made a lot of mistakes. We've made mistakes. We're far from perfect. And we regret many of these mistakes, and we've paid for some of them dearly. But in the equation of things, we are truly, and this is something which history has somewhat distorted. We came back to our homeland after over half of our people were wiped off in the Holocaust, seeking a home. The United Nations on the 29th of November 1947 declared the partition of Palestine into two states, very visionary actually, a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. We accepted it. The next day, as you know, 7 Arab armies invaded us, and we had the War of Independence. And I really don't think it would be right, and this is why I'll stop right here, to go into history. I mean, we want to talk about the future rather than about the past. I always prefer to dream rather than remember. But about Lebanon, I already answered that very impressive young lady from Lebanon about what happened in Lebanon. It's true that many innocent civilians were killed in Lebanon. But when you have a terror organization taking you hostage, using civilians as human shields, using their homes as bunkers for their missiles, putting up their headquarters in very densely populated civilian areas, shooting and firing missiles and rockets from very, very densely populated neighborhoods. These things happen. War is ugly. War is horrible. And civilians get hurt. The differences, the real differences, and I want to be very, very clear about that while for us, every dead Lebanese child is a horrible mistake and a tragedy. For the other side, every dead Israeli is a huge success and a cause for celebration. That is the difference. The difference is that we try to protect our civilians, and the Hezbollah held their own people hostage. Then you talk about the prisoners. There is this equation between the Israeli prisoners and the Palestinian prisoners. The Israeli prisoners in this particular case are 3 young boys who were kidnapped from across the border by terrorists and taken hostage. Palestinian prisoners are not there because of traffic violations. Many of them, including women and children, I've just brought you an example of that 27-year-old woman, are terrorists who cold-bloodedly murdered innocent Israelis.
And many are not, right?
Some are, others have committed other crimes, but a large majority are murderers who donned explosive belts, expecting to meet 72 virgins up in heaven, and went out to kill women and children. We know of cases where husbands donned that explosive belt on their wives and sent them out to blow themselves up, sometimes in order to save the soiled family honor. We know cases where fathers have donned it on their daughters. This is unimaginable to anybody. And these people, these prisoners people talk about, many of them have blood on their hands. Many of them are responsible for killing innocent people in university cafeterias, in kindergartens, in cafes, in restaurants, in bars, and in discos. You know, when I presented my credentials to Kofi Annan on the 6th floor of the United Nations on January 6th, 2003, I said to them, I said, Your Excellency, I'm presenting my credentials on behalf of a nation, a people, and a child. And I said, the nation is the state of Israel, which I love very much. The people are the Jewish people I'm very proud to represent. And the child is my 4-year-old grandson, Ron, who attends a kindergarten in the heart of Tel Aviv. And being the crazy and devoted grandfather I am, I sometimes go to pick him up from school, kidnap him before his mother manages to pick him up. And every time I approach his kindergarten, my heart breaks at the sight of that armed guard standing outside his kindergarten. Israel is the only democracy in the world whose kindergartens, schools, restaurants, cafes, universities have to be guarded by armed guards. And this is the whole difference. And we have to stop this culture of killing. We have to stop this sanctifying of killing on both sides. On both sides. Believe me, Israeli soldiers who experience that, Israeli soldiers who are standing at those roadblocks sometimes, they come home scarred. Believe me, this is not what they were brought up to do. And this is why, I think, we can play the blame game forever. You're doing this, we're doing that, you did this, we did that, this happened, that happened. I mean, what I'm really saying today is let's truly, I hope the world understands it. There was a time when the world did not understand it. During the horrible suicide bombings, I was on CNN. I happened to be in Paris, and I was in a Paris studio. And as happens sometimes in CNN, the interviewer was very hostile. And it was after several children were killed by a suicide bombing. And I said to her, you know, I just sat at a small cafe on the Boulevard Saint-Germain before coming to the studio here. And I had a glass of coffee, a cup of coffee. And I looked around and I saw how peaceful it was and how happy everybody was. And I said to myself, I finally understand what the difference is. A cup of coffee in Paris can cost you $4. A cup of coffee in Jerusalem, Haifa, or Tel Aviv could cost you the lives of 4 children. That's what we're talking about. And all I'm saying tonight in this incredible institution, which is a beacon of excellence and of learning and of tolerance and of democracy, is let's put an end to it. Let's stop with the blaming. Let's stop with the blame game. We've made mistakes. You've made mistakes. Let's finally find the leadership that can bring us together and make us, and at least our children and grandchildren, enjoy a future without any of those tragedies.
Good way to end. Do you want to say anything? So thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and I think that is precisely why we have this kind of dialogue. Remarkable comments, remarkable questions. Have a safe evening. Good night, everyone.